Between 1890 and 1920, the Norris family of Millbrook, Connecticut, owned 47 dogs. Not a single one lived to see its second birthday in their care. Not because they passed away from natural causes, not because of accidents or illness, but because every single dog they brought into their grand Victorian mansion on Elm Street simply vanished into the night, never to be seen again. The townspeople called it coincidence. The local veterinarian called it impossible. But Dr. Lewis Pemberton, the town physician who had delivered all 3 Norris children, called it something else entirely when he finally broke his 30-year silence. In 1920, Theodore Norris was Millbrook's most respected citizen. His textile mill employed half the town, his donations built the church steeple, and his wife Constance was known for her elaborate garden parties that drew visitors from as far as Hartford. They were the picture of New England prosperity, with their 3 well-mannered children and their sprawling estate that overlooked the Connecticut River. But there was something about the way those children never seemed to age in their expressions. Something about how Constance's smile never quite reached her eyes, and something deeply unsettling about the silence that seemed to follow the family wherever they went. The first dog disappeared on a Tuesday in October 1890, a beautiful golden retriever named Rusty that Theodore had purchased as a surprise for young Edmund's 8th birthday. The family reported that Rusty had somehow escaped through an open gate, though Margaret Whitfield, who lived directly across the street, swore she had seen that gate latched shut just hours before. More dogs followed: spaniels, terriers, hunting hounds, lapdogs. It didn't matter the breed or size. They would arrive at the Norris estate healthy and eager, and within weeks, sometimes days, they would simply be gone. What made it truly disturbing wasn't just the frequency or the pattern. It was the way the family reacted. No tears from the children, no frantic searching, no posted rewards or desperate pleas in the local newspaper. Just a quiet acceptance, followed by another trip to the dog breeder and another new arrival at the mansion on Elm Street. Pastor Samuel Hendricks would later testify that he had never once heard the Norris family pray for a lost pet, despite their regular attendance at Sunday services. But perhaps most chilling of all was what Dr. Pemberton discovered during a house call in 1906, when he noticed something that would haunt him for the rest of his days. In all his years of visiting the Norris home to treat the children's various ailments, he had never once heard a dog bark. Not when he knocked on the door, not when strangers approached the property, not even when other dogs passed by on the street. The dogs the Norrises owned were silent. Unnaturally, impossibly silent. And then, just like all the others, they too would disappear. Welcome back to the Creepy Journal, where we uncover the dark truths that history tried to bury. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into a story that the town of Millbrook, Connecticut, spent decades trying to forget. If you're fascinated by the mysteries that lurk behind respectable facades, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an entry from our collection of forgotten horrors. Millbrook, Connecticut in 1890 was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where front doors remained unlocked, and where the most scandalous gossip involved who forgot to bring a covered dish to the church potluck. Nestled along the Connecticut River, the town owed its prosperity to the Norris textile mill, a sprawling brick complex that employed nearly 300 workers and processed cotton from as far south as Georgia. The mill's success had transformed Millbrook from a sleepy farming community into a thriving industrial town, complete with gas streetlights, a proper fire department, and even talk of bringing electric power to the main thoroughfares. At the heart of this prosperity stood Theodore Norris, a man whose reputation was as spotless as the white shirts his mill produced. Standing well over 6 feet tall with steel grey hair and piercing blue eyes, Theodore commanded respect wherever he went. He had built his fortune from nothing, arriving in Millbrook as a young man with little more than ambition and a keen understanding of textile machinery. By 1885, he owned the largest mill in the Connecticut River Valley and had married Constance Fairweather, the daughter of a prominent Hartford banking family. The Norris mansion on Elm Street was a testament to their success. 3 stories of Victorian grandeur, complete with ornate gingerbread trim, wraparound porches, and manicured gardens that were the envy of every household in town. The property sprawled across nearly 4 acres, surrounded by an intricate wrought iron fence that Theodore had commissioned from craftsmen in Boston. Every window gleamed, every hedge was perfectly trimmed, and every flower bed bloomed in precise, geometric patterns that Constance personally supervised. Constance herself was a woman of refined beauty and impeccable social graces. Her auburn hair was always perfectly coiffed, her dresses imported from New York's finest boutiques, and her dinner parties were legendary affairs that could make or break a family's social standing in Millbrook. She served on the boards of 3 charitable organizations, organized the annual church bazaar, and was known to personally deliver soup to families affected by mill accidents. To the outside world, she was the perfect Victorian wife and mother. Their 3 children seemed to complete the picture of domestic bliss. Edmund, the eldest, was studious and well-mannered, excelling in his studies at the local academy and showing promise as a future heir to the family business. Violet, their only daughter, was praised for her musical talents and her skill at watercolor painting. Young Charles, the baby of the family, was described by his teachers as exceptionally bright and surprisingly mature for his age. But those who paid closer attention began to notice subtle details that didn't quite fit the perfect family portrait. Margaret Whitfield, whose bedroom window faced the Norris estate, mentioned to her sister that she had never once seen the children playing in their expansive yard. Mrs. Florence Ashworth, who taught at the local school, noted that while the Norris children were always impeccably behaved, they never seemed to form friendships with their classmates. And Dr. Pemberton, during his regular house calls, observed that the children spoke only when spoken to, always giving proper answers, but never volunteering information or displaying the natural curiosity typical of young minds. The house itself seemed to mirror this strange formality. Despite its grandeur, visitors often commented on an inexplicable chill that seemed to permeate the rooms, even during the warmest summer months. The curtains in the 3rd-floor windows remained perpetually drawn, leading to whispered speculation about what might be housed in those mysterious upper chambers. And though the Norrises employed a full staff of servants, the turnover was remarkably high. Housemaids rarely lasted more than a few months before finding reasons to seek employment elsewhere. Most peculiar of all was the silence that seemed to follow the family. Other wealthy households buzzed with the sounds of daily life, children's laughter, servants' chatter, the general commotion of a busy family. But the Norris mansion maintained an almost church-like quiet, broken only by the measured sounds of footsteps on polished floors and the soft murmur of carefully modulated conversations. Even their social gatherings, elaborate as they were, seemed to lack the spontaneous joy that characterized similar events at other prominent homes. Yet, none of these observations seemed significant enough to warrant serious concern. The Norrises were respected, successful, and generous contributors to the community. If they were a bit formal, a bit reserved, well, that was simply their way. After all, wealth and responsibility often bred a certain solemnity. It wasn't until the dogs began disappearing that people started to wonder if there might be something darker lurking beneath the pristine surface of Millbrook's most prominent family. The pattern emerged gradually, so subtly that it took years before anyone connected the individual incidents into a disturbing whole. It began with Rusty, that golden retriever purchased for Edmund's birthday in October 1890. Theodore had made quite a show of the purchase, visiting Jeremiah Stone's kennel on the outskirts of town and selecting what Stone later described as the finest pup in the litter, healthy as a horse and friendly as they come. The whole transaction was witnessed by several townspeople, and young Edmund had seemed genuinely excited about his new companion. Yet within 2 weeks, Rusty was gone. The family's explanation was simple enough. The dog had somehow escaped through an unlocked gate and wandered off into the countryside. Such things happened, especially with young, energetic dogs, unfamiliar with their new surroundings. Theodore even posted a small notice in the Millbrook Gazette, offering a modest reward for Rusty's return. But when no one came forward, the family seemed to accept the loss with remarkable composure and moved on with their lives. What struck Margaret Whitfield as odd was how quickly they moved on. She had raised 3 children of her own and knew the devastation a child felt when losing a beloved pet. But Edmund showed no signs of grief or continued longing for his lost companion. Within a month, it was as if Rusty had never existed. When Mrs. Whitfield mentioned a dog in casual conversation with Constance, she was met with a blank stare and a polite but firm redirection of the topic. The second dog arrived in spring 1891. This time, it was a pair of beagles, supposedly purchased to teach the children about responsibility and the rewards of caring for animals. Again, Theodore made the transaction publicly, this time traveling to a breeder in New Haven and returning with 2 healthy puppies that he proudly displayed to neighbors. The children seemed appropriately pleased, and for a brief time, the beagles could be seen playing in the Norris yard under Constance's watchful supervision. But by midsummer, both beagles had vanished. This time, the family explanation involved a supposed hole in the fence that had allowed the dogs to escape during a thunderstorm. Deputy Sheriff Henry Caldwell was called to investigate, more as a courtesy to the prominent family than from any real suspicion of foul play. His cursory examination of the property revealed no obvious gaps in the fencing, but Theodore quickly arranged for additional reinforcement of the entire perimeter, claiming he wanted to prevent any future escapes. What troubled Deputy Caldwell, though he kept his concerns to himself at the time, was the family's demeanor during his visit. In his experience, when children lost beloved pets, they were either heartbroken or desperately hopeful that the animals might be found. The Norris children displayed neither emotion. They answered his questions politely but showed no real interest. In the investigation, even more unsettling was how they referred to the dogs in past tense, as if their disappearance was not just accepted but expected. The third incident occurred in autumn 1892, and this time there were witnesses to the aftermath. Pastor Samuel Hendricks was visiting the Norris home to discuss charitable donations when he noticed what appeared to be a dog's collar lying abandoned near the garden shed. When he inquired about it, Constance explained that their latest pet, a collie named Major, had moved on to a better situation. The phrasing struck Pastor Hendricks as peculiar, but when he pressed for details, Theodore smoothly interjected that they had found Major a new home with a farming family who could provide more space for such an energetic breed. yet Mrs. Ashworth, the schoolteacher, had seen Major just 3 days earlier during a visit to discuss Violet's academic progress. The dog had appeared healthy and well cared for, though she noted something strange about its behavior. Unlike most collies, which were known for their vocal and energetic nature, Major had remained completely silent throughout her visit, sitting motionless beside Constance's chair as if waiting for some unspoken command. The frequency began to accelerate. Throughout 1893 and 1894, the Norris family acquired and lost 6 more dogs. Each disappearance came with a different explanation: escaped during a delivery, spooked by fireworks taken by traveling gypsies, found a new home with distant relatives. The stories varied, but the pattern remained consistent. Healthy dogs would arrive at the Norris estate and within weeks or months would simply vanish without a trace. Dr. Pemberton began keeping informal notes after his 5th or 6th visit to the Norris home coincided with yet another missing pet. As the family physician, he had legitimate reasons to visit regularly, treating the children for various minor ailments and conducting routine health examinations. During these visits, he began paying closer attention to the family's interactions and the general atmosphere of the household. What he observed deeply disturbed him. The children never asked about their missing pets. They never mentioned wanting new ones. When dogs were present in the house, the children interacted with them in a peculiar manner, not with the natural affection and playfulness typical of young people, but with a kind of clinical detachment, as if the animals were objects to be managed, rather than companions to be loved. Most unsettling of all was what Dr. Pemberton witnessed during a visit in winter 1895. He had arrived to examine Charles, who was suffering from a persistent cough, when he noticed a small spaniel cowering beneath the dining room table. The dog appeared healthy, but exhibited behavior he had never seen before in a household pet. It would not make eye contact with any family member, would not approach when called, and seemed to flinch whenever anyone moved too quickly. When Dr. Pemberton attempted to pet the animal, it recoiled as if expecting to be struck. 2 weeks later, that spaniel had also disappeared. This time, Constance explained that the dog had been unsuited to family life and had been returned to the breeder. But when Dr. Pemberton discreetly inquired with local breeders, none remembered taking back a spaniel from the Norris family. In fact, most reported that the Norrises were among their best customers, frequently purchasing new animals, but never complaining about any behavioral issues or seeking to return previous purchases. The community's response to these incidents revealed the power of the Norris family's reputation and social position. When concerns were raised, they were quickly dismissed or explained away. After all, Theodore Norris employed half the town, contributed generously to local causes, and had never been anything but a model citizen. If his family had unusual luck with pets, well, some people simply weren't meant to be animal owners. Perhaps city life didn't suit country dogs. Or perhaps the family's high standards made them more particular about their pets' behavior. But a few observant residents began to notice other details that seemed connected to the missing dogs. Margaret Whitfield reported strange sounds coming from the Norris property late at night. Not barking or the typical sounds of distressed animals, but odd scraping noises and what sounded like muffled digging. Mrs. Rachel McKinnon, who briefly worked as a housemaid for the Norrises in 1895, mentioned that she had been strictly forbidden from entering certain areas of the basement and had once noticed what appeared to be freshly turned earth in the far corner of the property. Most telling of all was the observation made by Dr. Victor Ashland, a veterinarian from the neighboring town of Cromwell. During a professional consultation in Millbrook, he happened to mention the Norris family's unusual pattern of pet ownership. His comment sparked a quiet conversation among several local professionals who began to realize that, collectively, they had witnessed something far more disturbing than a series of unfortunate coincidences. The Norris family wasn't simply unlucky with pets. They were systematically acquiring and disposing of animals in a manner that defied every reasonable explanation. As word of the Norris family's peculiar relationship with their pets began to circulate in hushed conversations throughout Millbrook, other disturbing details started to surface. Margaret Whitfield, whose bedroom window provided an unobstructed view of the Norris estate, began keeping a journal of unusual activities she observed. What she documented would later prove crucial to understanding the true nature of what was happening behind the pristine facade of the mansion on Elm Street. The strange visitors began appearing in late 1896. They would arrive after dark, always on foot, never announcing themselves with the traditional courtesy of knocking on the front door. Instead, they would move directly to the side entrance near the kitchen, where Constance would be waiting as if she had been expecting them. Margaret noted that these individuals, she counted at least 7 different people over the course of 2 years, shared certain unsettling characteristics. They were invariably thin to the point of gauntness, dressed in dark clothing that seemed too large for their frames, and moved with an odd, shuffling gait that suggested either advanced age or some form of physical disability. What made these visits particularly strange was their duration, and the family's behavior during them. The visitors would remain in the house for hours, sometimes until well past midnight, yet no sounds of conversation or social activity ever emerged from the residence. The house would remain as eerily quiet as always, with only the occasional flicker of candlelight visible through the first-floor windows. Most peculiar of all, these visits seemed to coincide with the periods when the family had recently acquired new dogs, though Margaret couldn't be certain if this correlation was meaningful or merely coincidental. Pastor Hendricks encountered one of these mysterious visitors quite by accident during a late evening walk in October 1897. The man was leaving the Norris property through the side gate when the pastor approached to offer a friendly greeting. The stranger's reaction was startling. He recoiled as if struck, pulled his hat low over his face, and hurried away without saying a word. Pastor Hendricks noted that the man appeared to be elderly, with pale, almost translucent skin and hands that shook with what might have been palsy or extreme nervousness. When Pastor Hendricks mentioned the encounter to Theodore Norris the following Sunday, the mill owner's explanation was smooth but oddly vague. The visitor had been a distant relative, he claimed, someone with specialized knowledge of animal training who occasionally consulted with the family about their pets' behavioral issues. This explanation might have been satisfactory if not for the fact that the Norris dogs never seemed to exhibit behavioral problems. They were always described as unnaturally docile and obedient during their brief stays with the family. Dr. Pemberton had his own encounter with one of these strange visitors during a house call in spring 1898. He had arrived to treat Violet for a minor respiratory infection when he noticed a woman sitting in the parlor with Constance. The woman appeared to be in her 60s, with steel-grey hair pulled back in a severe bun and clothing that seemed decades out of fashion. What struck Dr. Pemberton most forcefully was her complete lack of reaction to his presence. She didn't acknowledge his arrival, didn't respond to his polite greeting, and continued staring straight ahead, as if he didn't exist. Constance introduced the woman only as a family friend, and quickly ushered Dr. Pemberton upstairs to examine Violet. When he descended after completing his examination, the woman was gone, having departed as silently and mysteriously as she had arrived. Dr. Pemberton noted in his private journal that the woman's behavior reminded him of patients he had encountered in his medical training who suffered from severe mental disturbances or neurological conditions. The pattern of these visits became more frequent throughout 1898 and 1899, with Margaret Whitfield documenting nearly 24 separate occasions when unknown individuals entered and left the Norris property under cover of darkness. She began to notice that these visits often preceded the acquisition of new dogs by a matter of days, as if the mysterious consultations were part of some kind of planning or preparation process. Thomas Blackwood, a young reporter for the Millbrook Gazette, became interested in these strange occurrences after hearing rumors at a local tavern. His attempts to investigate, however, were met with surprising resistance from the community. When he approached potential sources for information about the Norris family's unusual visitors, he found that people either claimed to know nothing or quickly changed the subject. Even more puzzling was the discovery that several individuals who had previously mentioned seeing strange people around the Norris property now insisted they had been mistaken or had imagined the entire thing. The most chilling encounter occurred in autumn 1899, when Deputy Caldwell was conducting his regular evening patrol and noticed a figure standing motionless in the Norris yard. Thinking it might be an intruder, he approached to investigate. As he drew closer, he realized the figure was an elderly man who appeared to be staring intently at the house's third-floor windows. When Deputy Caldwell called out to him, the man turned slowly and fixed him with a gaze that the deputy later described as empty as a dead fish. The man claimed to be waiting for someone inside the house, but when Deputy Caldwell offered to escort him to the front door, he declined and walked away into the night. What disturbed Deputy Caldwell most was not the man's strange behavior, but his physical appearance. He moved as if his joints were stiff or painful. His skin had an unhealthy pallor that was visible even in the dim streetlight, and there was something about his facial features that seemed not quite right, though the deputy couldn't articulate exactly what was unsettling about them. When Deputy Caldwell mentioned the incident to Theodore Norris the next day, the mill owner seemed genuinely surprised and concerned. He claimed to have no knowledge of anyone waiting in his yard and suggested that the man might have been confused or lost. Theodore even invited the deputy to patrol the property more frequently if he thought it necessary for the family's safety. This response seemed perfectly reasonable. Yet Deputy Caldwell couldn't shake the feeling that Theodore's surprise had been performed rather than genuine. The mystery deepened when Mrs. McKinnon, the former housemaid, came forward with information about what she had observed during her brief employment with the family. She described finding evidence that the third floor of the mansion was regularly occupied, despite the family's claims that those rooms were used only for storage. She had discovered recently used bedding, personal items that didn't belong to any family member, and what appeared to be makeshift living quarters, arranged in the sealed-off sections of the upper floor. Most disturbing of all was Mrs. McKinnon's account of voices she had heard coming from the third floor during her night shifts. The voices were too muffled to make out individual words, but she described them as having an unusual quality, not quite normal human speech, but something that sounded strained or distorted. When she mentioned these sounds to Constance, she was told that the family sometimes hosted distant relatives who preferred privacy and were not to be disturbed under any circumstances. The picture that emerged from these various accounts was of a family that was harboring unknown individuals in their home. people who remained hidden during daylight hours but whose presence could be detected by those who paid careful attention. These mysterious residents seemed to be involved somehow in the family's strange relationship with their pets, though the exact nature of their role remained unclear. What was certain was that the Norris family was engaged in activities that went far beyond the simple eccentricity of wealthy people who had trouble keeping pets. The events that finally brought the Norris family's dark secrets into the light began on a humid Tuesday morning in July 1906. Mrs. Florence Ashworth was walking to the schoolhouse early to prepare for the summer reading program when she heard what she would later describe as the most pitiful sound that ever reached human ears, coming from the direction of the Norris estate. It was a dog's cry, but unlike any she had ever heard, not the typical bark or whine of a distressed animal, but something that sounded almost human in its anguish. The sound was coming from somewhere within the Norris property, though Mrs. Ashworth couldn't pinpoint its exact location. What made the incident particularly disturbing was that the crying continued for nearly 10 minutes, during which time she could see Constance Norris calmly tending to her roses in the front garden, apparently oblivious to the sounds of distress emanating from her own property. When Mrs. Ashworth approached the fence to ask if assistance was needed, Constance looked up with her usual serene smile and claimed to hear nothing unusual. Word of the incident spread quickly through Millbrook's tight-knit community, and by afternoon, several other residents had come forward with similar accounts. Margaret Whitfield reported hearing strange sounds from the Norris property on multiple occasions, but had assumed they were related to maintenance work or construction. The pharmacist, Mr. Edwin Morse, mentioned that he had noticed an unusual odor when delivering medications to the Norris home, something organic and unpleasant that seemed to emanate from the basement area. The breaking point came 2 days later when young Timothy Walsh, the son of one of Theodore's mill workers, lost his ball over the Norris fence while playing in the street. The boy, being only 8 years old and unaware of the family's reputation for privacy, climbed over the fence to retrieve his toy. What he saw in the backyard would haunt him for the rest of his life and finally provide the community with concrete evidence of the horrors taking place behind the mansion's pristine facade. Timothy found his ball near a large oak tree, but as he bent to pick it up, he noticed something that made him freeze in terror. Partially hidden beneath a tarp near the garden shed were what appeared to be several small wooden crates, and from these containers came the unmistakable sounds of animals in distress. But these weren't the normal sounds of dogs barking or whimpering. They were weak, desperate noises that suggested creatures in extreme physical distress. Before Timothy could investigate further, he was discovered by Charles Norris, who had apparently been watching from a window. Charles approached the boy with an expression that Timothy later described as cold as winter ice and demanded to know what he was doing on the property. When Timothy explained about his ball, Charles retrieved it and escorted him firmly to the fence, warning him never to return and never to mention what he had seen to anyone. But Timothy was too frightened to keep silent. He ran home and told his father, Patrick Walsh, everything he had witnessed. Patrick initially dismissed his son's story as childhood imagination, but the boy's obvious terror and the specific details he provided convinced the elder Walsh that something genuinely disturbing was occurring at the Norris estate. After much deliberation, Patrick decided to approach Dr. Pemberton. Knowing the physician's reputation for discretion and his professional relationship with the Norris family, Dr. Pemberton listened to Patrick Walsh's account with growing alarm. The boy's description of the containers and the sounds of distressed animals confirmed his own long-held suspicions about the family's treatment of their pets. More importantly, it provided the first eyewitness account of what might be happening to the dogs that kept disappearing from the Norris household. Dr. Pemberton realized that his ethical obligations as a physician and a member of the community required him to investigate further. The following Sunday, Dr. Pemberton approached Pastor Hendricks after the morning service and shared his concerns. The two men, both respected community leaders, agreed that the allegations were too serious to ignore. Regardless of the Norris family's prominent position in Millbrook society, they decided to involve Deputy Sheriff Caldwell, who had previously expressed his own reservations about the strange occurrences at the Norris property. Deputy Caldwell's response was immediate and decisive. The boy's testimony, combined with the pattern of missing dogs and the various suspicious incidents reported over the years, provided sufficient grounds for an official investigation. However, given Theodore Norris's influence in the community and his friendship with Sheriff William Garrett, Caldwell knew he needed to proceed carefully and gather additional evidence before taking any formal action. The deputy began conducting discreet inquiries among the local dog breeders, veterinarians, and pet owners. What he discovered painted a disturbing picture of systematic deception. Several breeders confirmed that the Norris family had been among their most frequent customers. But contrary to the family's claims about returning unsuitable animals, none of the dogs sold to the Norrises had ever been brought back. Moreover, several breeders mentioned that they had been asked unusual questions about the animal's health, temperament, and likelihood of being missed if they disappeared. Dr. Victor Ashland, the veterinarian from Cromwell, provided perhaps the most damning evidence. He revealed that Theodore Norris had approached him on multiple occasions seeking advice about animal sedation and restraint techniques, claiming he needed the information to help manage aggressive pets. Dr. Ashland had found these requests suspicious at the time, but had assumed they were related to legitimate animal care concerns. In light of recent revelations, however, he began to suspect a much darker purpose. The investigation took on greater urgency when Mrs. McKinnon, the former housemaid, came forward with additional details about her time working for the Norris family. She described being required to prepare meals for individuals who lived on the third floor, but whom she was never allowed to see. These meals, she noted, often included raw meat and bones, food more suitable for animals than humans. She also reported finding tools in the basement that seemed designed for restraining or containing small animals, though she had been told they were used for gardening purposes. Most shocking of all was Mrs. McKinnon's account of what she had discovered in a locked room in the basement during her final week of employment. While cleaning nearby, she had noticed that the door had been left slightly ajar and had glimpsed inside. What she saw were several wooden containers similar to those described by young Timothy Walsh, along with what appeared to be medical instruments and charts, documenting various physical measurements and observations. When confronted with this accumulating evidence, Sheriff Garrett could no longer ignore the situation. Despite his personal friendship with Theodore Norris, the allegations were too serious and the evidence too compelling to dismiss as gossip or misunderstanding. On July 20th, 1906, Sheriff Garrett obtained a warrant to search the Norris property, marking the beginning of an investigation that would reveal horrors beyond anything the community had imagined possible. The night before the search was port to be conducted, Margaret Whitfield observed unusual activity at the Norris estate. Lights burned in every window until well past midnight, and she could see figures moving back and forth between the house and various outbuildings. Most significantly, she witnessed what appeared to be several people leaving the property carrying large bundles, though in the darkness she couldn't determine what these packages contained or where the mysterious figures went after departing the estate. By morning, an eerie calm had settled over the Norris mansion. The family appeared for breakfast as usual, the children departed for their daily lessons, and Constance was seen working in her garden with her typical serenity. To casual observers, nothing seemed amiss, but those who knew what to look for noticed subtle changes. Windows that had been covered for years were now open. Sections of the yard that had been off-limits were now accessible, and the strange visitors who had been coming and going for years were nowhere to be seen. The stage was set for a confrontation that would strip away the carefully maintained facade of respectability and reveal the true nature of what had been happening behind the walls of Millbrook's most prominent family residence. In the immediate aftermath of Sheriff Garrett's announcement that he would be conducting an official search of the Norris property, something remarkable and disturbing happened in Millbrook. The town fell silent. Not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful community, but the oppressive silence of a place where people suddenly realized they might have been living alongside something monstrous and were terrified of what acknowledging that truth might mean. The announcement of the investigation spread through Millbrook like wildfire, but rather than generating the excited gossip and speculation that typically accompanied such dramatic events, it seemed to cast a pall over the entire community. Conversation stopped when certain names were mentioned. Neighbors who had previously shared every detail of their daily lives suddenly became guarded and evasive. Even the children seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted in their small world at Norris Textile Mill. The atmosphere became particularly tense. The 300 workers who depended on Theodore Norris for their livelihoods found themselves in an impossible position. Many had harbored private suspicions about their employer's family for years, but speaking out could mean the loss of jobs that fed their own families. The mill provided the economic foundation for nearly half of Millbrook's residents, and everyone understood that challenging Theodore Norris meant risking the welfare of the entire community. Margaret Whitfield discovered just how deep this silence ran when she attempted to share her years of observations with neighbors who had previously expressed their own concerns about the Norris family. People who had once whispered about strange sounds and suspicious activities now claimed to remember nothing unusual. Mrs. Catherine Pierce, who had previously mentioned seeing lights in the sealed third-floor windows, now insisted she had been mistaken about the location. Even her own sister, who had listened to countless accounts of midnight visitors and unexplained noises, suddenly suggested that Margaret might have been letting her imagination run away with her. The pressure to remain silent wasn't just social, it was economic and political as well. Theodore Norris sat on the town council, contributed heavily to local charities, and held mortgages on several local businesses. His influence extended far beyond his textile mill, touching nearly every aspect of life in Millbrook. Challenging him meant challenging the very foundation of the community's prosperity and stability. Dr. Pemberton found himself increasingly isolated as he continued to press for a thorough investigation. Colleagues who had previously expressed concerns about the Norris family now avoided him entirely. When he attempted to discuss his medical observations with other physicians in neighboring towns, he discovered that word of his accusations had preceded him, and he was met with skepticism and suggestions that he might be allowing personal animosity to cloud his professional judgment. The most telling indication of the town's collective reluctance to confront the truth came when Sheriff Garrett attempted to gather additional witnesses for his investigation. Despite years of rumors and whispered concerns, virtually no one was willing to provide official testimony about suspicious activities at the Norris estate. People who had previously been eager to share gossip about the family's strange behavior now claimed they had never noticed anything unusual. Pastor Hendricks faced particular pressure from his congregation to distance himself from the investigation. Several prominent church members, including the chairman of the Board of Deacons, suggested that his involvement in spreading unfounded allegations against one of the church's most generous benefactors was inappropriate for a man of the cloth. The not-so-subtle implication was that continued support for the investigation might result in a significant reduction in church donations and possibly even calls for his removal from the pulpit. The conspiracy of silence might have been complete, if not for one individual who refused to be intimidated or bought off. Dr. Elias Pemberton had been Millbrook's physician for over 20 years, had delivered most of the town's children, and had built a reputation based on unwavering integrity and professional competence. Unlike others in the community, he had no financial dependence on Theodore Norris and no reason to fear economic retaliation. More importantly, Dr. Pemberton had taken a physician's oath to do no harm, and he had come to believe that his silence, in the face of mounting evidence, constituted a violation of that sacred pledge. The medical observations he had made during his visits to the Norris home, combined with the testimony of young Timothy Walsh and the revelations from Mrs. McKinnon, convinced him that animals were being systematically tortured and killed on the Norris property. On the evening before the scheduled search, Dr. Pemberton made a decision that would forever change his standing in the community. He approached Sheriff Garrett and provided a detailed written statement documenting every suspicious incident he had witnessed during his years of treating the Norris family. His testimony was methodical, professional, and devastating in its implications. Dr. Pemberton described the unnatural silence of the dogs in the Norris household, the family's complete lack of emotional response to their pets' disappearances, and the strange behavior he had observed in animals that seemed to cower in fear whenever family members approached. He documented his medical opinion that the animals showed signs of prolonged stress and possible physical abuse, based on their behavioral patterns and physical condition during his visits. Most significantly, Dr. Pemberton revealed that he had been keeping detailed notes of his observations for several years, suspecting that something was seriously wrong but lacking sufficient evidence to act. His medical journal contained dates, times, and specific descriptions of incidents that painted a picture of systematic animal cruelty. Spanning more than a decade, the doctor's testimony provided Sheriff Garrett with the credible, professional witness he needed to justify his investigation in the face of community pressure and Theodore Norris's political influence. Dr. Pemberton's reputation for honesty and his lack of any apparent motive for making false accusations lent credibility to the other, less reliable accounts that had been dismissed as gossip or imagination. But Dr. Pemberton's decision to speak out came at a considerable personal cost. Within days of providing his statement, he found that several of his longtime patients had decided to seek medical care elsewhere. Anonymous letters appeared under his door, suggesting that he was motivated by jealousy of the Norris family's success and threatening unspecified consequences if he continued his accusations. Most painfully, his own wife expressed fears that his involvement in the investigation might destroy his medical practice and force them to leave Millbrook entirely. The pressure on Dr. Pemberton intensified when Theodore Norris himself paid a personal visit to the physician's office. The conversation, as Dr. Pemberton later recounted it, was cordial on the surface, but clearly intended as intimidation. Theodore expressed disappointment that someone he had considered a friend would spread malicious rumors about his family. He reminded the doctor of the many charitable contributions the Norris family had made to the community and suggested that false accusations against prominent citizens could have serious legal consequences. Theodore's visit concluded with what Dr. Pemberton interpreted as a veiled threat. The mill owner mentioned that he had recently been reviewing his various business relationships and investments in the community, including the mortgage he held on the building that housed Dr. Pemberton's medical practice. While he didn't explicitly threaten foreclosure, the implication was clear. Continued cooperation with the investigation could result in financial ruin for the doctor and his family. Despite these pressures, Dr. Pemberton refused to recant his testimony or withdraw from the investigation. His steadfast commitment to the truth provided Sheriff Garrett with the backbone he needed to proceed with the search. Even in the face of mounting political and social pressure to abandon the inquiry, the doctor's courage in the face of intimidation would prove crucial in exposing the full extent of the horrors that had been hidden behind the respectable facade of Millbrook's most prominent family. On the morning of July 21, 1906, Sheriff William Garrett arrived at the Norris estate with a small team consisting of Deputy Henry Caldwell, Dr. Pemberton as a medical consultant, and Thomas Blackwood from the Millbrook Gazette, whose presence was intended to ensure transparency in the proceedings. The search warrant, signed by Judge Harrison Thorne, granted them authority to examine the entire property, including all buildings, outstructures, and grounds, in search of evidence related to animal cruelty and possible illegal activities. Theodore Norris met them at the front gate with his characteristic composure intact, dressed impeccably in a dark suit and displaying no signs of anxiety or concern. He welcomed the search party with what appeared to be genuine cooperation. He expressed understanding for the sheriff's position and stated that he hoped a thorough investigation would finally put to rest the unfounded rumors that had been circulating about his family. Constance and the children, he explained, had temporarily relocated to stay with relatives in Hartford to avoid the disruption and stress of the search. The initial examination of the house's main floors revealed nothing obviously suspicious. The rooms were immaculately maintained, furnished with expensive pieces that reflected the family's wealth and social status. Dr. Pemberton noted, however, that despite the family's reputation for pet ownership, there were no signs of animals anywhere in the residence. No food, bowls, toys, leashes, or any of the typical accessories associated with keeping dogs. When questioned about this absence, Theodore explained that the family had decided to take a temporary break from pet ownership due to their repeated disappointments with animals that had run away. The search of the basement, however, began to reveal disturbing anomalies. Deputy Caldwell discovered a room that had been recently cleaned but still bore evidence of its previous use. Scratches on the wooden walls suggested that animals had been confined there, and despite the thorough cleaning, the lingering odor indicated that the space had housed creatures in distress for extended periods. Most significantly, they found several sets of restraints that appeared designed for small to medium-sized dogs, along with tools that had no apparent household purpose. Dr. Pemberton's medical training proved invaluable in interpreting what they found. In a locked cabinet, he discovered bottles of chloroform and other substances commonly used for sedation, along with surgical instruments that seemed inappropriate for a private residence. When questioned about these items, Theodore claimed they were left over from his late father's medical practice. though records showed that Theodore's father had been a businessman, not a physician. The most disturbing discovery in the basement was a collection of detailed journals, meticulously maintained and spanning more than 15 years. These records documented the acquisition of dozens of dogs, including dates of purchase, physical descriptions, behavioral observations, and detailed notes about various experiments and procedures. The clinical language used in these entries was chilling in its detachment, describing living creatures as if they were laboratory specimens rather than sentient beings. The journals revealed a pattern of systematic torture disguised as scientific observation. Entries described testing the animals' responses to various stimuli, their pain tolerance, and their behavioral changes under different forms of physical and psychological stress. Some entries included crude anatomical drawings and notes about surgical procedures performed without anesthesia. Most horrifying of all were references to the mysterious visitors who had been observed coming and going from the property. The journals revealed that these individuals were paying customers who came to observe and participate in the torture sessions. As the search moved to the third floor, the true scope of the Norris family's activities became apparent. The supposedly sealed and unused upper level had been converted into a series of specialized rooms, designed for housing both animals and the twisted individuals who paid to abuse them. Dr. Pemberton discovered living quarters that had clearly been occupied recently, complete with personal belongings, clothing, and evidence of meals prepared and consumed. One room had been arranged as a crude operating theater, complete with restraining tables, surgical instruments, and detailed charts showing animal anatomy. Another contained what could only be described as torture devices, mechanisms designed to inflict pain while keeping subjects alive and conscious. The walls were covered with diagrams and notes detailing various methods of causing suffering, suggesting that the Norris family had been conducting a systematic study of animal torture techniques. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of a detailed customer registry hidden behind a false wall. This ledger contained the names and addresses of individuals from throughout New England who had paid significant sums to participate in the activities at the Norris estate. The entries revealed a network of wealthy, respectable citizens who shared the family's sadistic interests and were willing to pay handsomely for the opportunity to indulge their darkest impulses in a secure, private setting. The registry included detailed notes about each customer's preferences and payment history, treating the torture of innocent animals as if it were a legitimate business enterprise. Some entries referred to regular customers who visited monthly, while others documented special arrangements for individuals seeking particular forms of cruelty. The financial records showed that this grotesque business had generated substantial income for the Norris family over many years. As the investigation continued, Sheriff Garrett realized that they were dealing with something far more extensive and organized than simple animal cruelty. The Norris estate had been operating as a commercial torture facility, catering to the sadistic desires of wealthy individuals who could afford to pay for their perversions. The family's reputation for respectability had provided perfect cover for an enterprise that violated every principle of decency and humanity. The search of the property's outbuildings revealed the final pieces of the puzzle. In a reinforced shed behind the main house, they discovered the wooden crates that young Timothy Walsh had glimpsed weeks earlier. These containers had been designed as mobile torture chambers, allowing the family to transport their activities to different locations or to house animals in conditions of extreme confinement. The construction of these devices showed careful planning and craftsmanship, indicating that the torture business had been a long-term, profitable enterprise. Most damning of all was the discovery of a crematorium hidden beneath the garden shed. This facility had been used to dispose of the evidence of the family's crimes, explaining why none of the missing dogs had ever been found despite extensive searches of the surrounding countryside. The ashes and bone fragments found in the crematorium's chamber provided grim testimony to the fate of dozens of innocent animals. By the end of the first day of searching, Sheriff Garrett had assembled evidence of a criminal enterprise that shocked even his experienced law enforcement sensibilities. The Norris family had not only been systematically torturing animals for their own gratification, but had been operating a commercial facility that catered to the sadistic desires of customers throughout the region. The scope and organization of their activities suggested a level of planning and premeditation that elevated their crimes far beyond simple cruelty into the realm of organized criminal conspiracy. The second day of the search began with Sheriff Garrett's team focusing on areas of the property that showed signs of recent disturbance. Margaret Whitfield's observations about nighttime activity had proven invaluable. The locations where she had seen figures moving with bundles corresponded exactly to areas where the ground showed evidence of hasty excavation and concealment efforts. Behind the carriage house, Deputy Caldwell's systematic probing of suspicious ground yielded the discovery that would haunt everyone present for the remainder of their lives. Buried in shallow graves were the remains of animals that told a story of suffering beyond imagination. Unlike the cremated remains found in the hidden furnace, these bodies had been preserved well enough to reveal the extent of the torture they had endured. Before death, Dr. Pemberton's medical examination of the remains revealed evidence of prolonged, systematic abuse. Bones showed signs of deliberate fractures that had been allowed to heal improperly, creating permanent deformities that would have caused constant pain. Surgical incisions had been made without regard for the animal's survival, apparently for the purpose of studying their responses to various forms of internal trauma. Most disturbing were the modifications that had been made to several animals, deliberate alterations to their bodies that served no purpose other than to increase their suffering and create grotesque spectacles for the entertainment of paying customers. The discovery of children's toys scattered among the animal remains added another layer of horror to the investigation. These weren't the typical playthings one might expect to find in a wealthy family's yard, but crude, handmade items that seemed designed to inflict pain rather than provide enjoyment. Dr. Pemberton recognized several of these objects as scaled down versions of the torture devices they had found in the house's hidden rooms, suggesting that the Norris children had been trained from an early age to participate in and enjoy the suffering of helpless creatures. As the excavation continued, the team uncovered evidence of the elaborate rituals that had surrounded the torture sessions. Buried alongside the animal remains were ceremonial objects, candles, incense burners, and ornate knives that suggested the abuse had been elevated to the level of religious ceremony for the participants. The arrangement of these objects indicated that the killing of the animals had been the culmination of extended torture sessions, performed with ritualistic precision for an audience of paying observers. The journals found in the basement began to make more sense as the physical evidence accumulated. Entries that had initially seemed like the ravings of disturbed minds now revealed themselves as detailed records of systematic experimentation in causing maximum suffering. The family had been documenting their methods, refining their techniques, and sharing their findings with a network of like-minded individuals who viewed animal torture as a form of scientific research. Most chilling was the discovery of photographic equipment, and developed images hidden in a secret compartment within the house's walls. These photographs documented the torture sessions in graphic detail, apparently taken both for the family's own records and to provide souvenirs for customers who had participated in particularly memorable events. The clinical precision with which these images had been composed and preserved revealed the depth of the family's detachment from normal human empathy. The photographs also provided crucial evidence of the identities of the mysterious visitors who had been observed coming and going from the property for years. Several prominent citizens from Millbrook and surrounding communities were clearly visible in the images, participating enthusiastically in activities that violated every standard of civilized behavior. The revelation that respected members of society, including businessmen, professionals, and even religious leaders, had been involved in the Norris family's grotesque enterprise, added a new dimension of scandal to the investigation. Among the most disturbing discoveries was a room that had been specifically designed for the entertainment of the Norris children. This space contained miniature versions of the torture devices found elsewhere in the house, apparently created to allow Edmund, Violet, and Charles to develop their skills in inflicting suffering on smaller animals, before graduating to participation in the adult activities. The room's decorations included artwork created by the children themselves, drawings and paintings that depicted animals in various states of distress, with a level of anatomical detail that could only have come from direct observation. Dr. Pemberton's examination of these artworks revealed that the children had been systematic in documenting their own participation in the family's crimes. Their drawings included careful notations about the animals' responses to different forms of abuse, suggesting that they had been trained to approach torture with scientific methodology. Most horrifying was the evident pride the children took in their work. Many of the drawings were signed and dated, as if they were precious keepsakes rather than evidence of unspeakable cruelty. The discovery of correspondence between Theodore Norris and individuals in other states revealed that the family's enterprise was part of a larger network of similar operations throughout New England. Letters found in a hidden safe described techniques for acquiring animals without arousing suspicion, methods for disposing of evidence, and strategies for identifying potential customers among the wealthy and influential. The Norris family had been pioneers in commercializing animal torture, creating a business model that was being replicated by associates in Boston, Providence, and New York. Perhaps most damning of all was the discovery of detailed financial records that revealed the true scope of the family's criminal profits. The torture business had generated more income than Theodore's textile mill, with individual customers paying hundreds of dollars for the privilege of participating in extended torture sessions. The family had been operating multiple revenue streams, charging admission fees for observation, premium rates for participation, and additional fees for special requests and custom torture scenarios. The financial records also revealed the extent to which the family had been bribing local officials to ensure their activities remained undiscovered. Regular payments had been made to several town council members, and substantial donations to various civic organizations had been timed to coincide with periods when the family's activities might have attracted unwanted attention. The corruption ran deep, extending far beyond the immediate crimes and implicating numerous supposedly respectable citizens in a conspiracy of silence and complicity. As the investigation entered its third day, Sheriff Garrett realized that he was dealing with a criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond a single family's twisted hobbies. The Norris estate had been the headquarters of an organized network that had systematically corrupted public officials, exploited innocent animals, and provided a venue for the wealthy to indulge their most depraved fantasies. The evidence was so overwhelming and the implications so far-reaching that Garrett began to understand why the community had been so reluctant to confront the truth about what had been happening in their midst. The discovery phase of the investigation concluded with the most haunting find of all, a room that appeared to have been Theodore Norris's private office, where he had maintained meticulous records of every animal that had suffered and died on his property. The walls were covered with photographs of each victim, arranged chronologically and labeled with dates, sources, and detailed descriptions of the abuse each had endured. This macabre gallery contained the images of over 200 animals, spanning nearly 3 decades of systematic cruelty that had begun long before the family's public reputation for pet ownership had emerged. The arrests came swiftly once the evidence had been catalogued and secured. On July 24, 1906, Sheriff Garrett traveled to Hartford with a team of federal marshals to apprehend Theodore, Constance, and their 3 children, who had been staying with Constance's relatives since the search began. The family's attempt to present a united front of innocence crumbled immediately when confronted with the overwhelming physical evidence discovered at their estate. Theodore Norris, the man who had commanded respect throughout Millbrook for decades, broke down completely when shown photographs of the torture chambers and crematorium found on his property. His confession, delivered in the Hartford County Jail, revealed details even more disturbing than what the physical evidence had suggested. The systematic torture of animals had begun as a childhood fascination that had gradually evolved into an obsession, then into a profitable business that had corrupted everyone it touched. Constance's reaction was perhaps even more chilling than her husband's breakdown. She showed no remorse for the suffering they had caused, instead expressing anger that their carefully constructed facade had been penetrated. During her interrogation, she revealed that the torture activities had been her idea, born from what she described as a scientific curiosity about the limits of animal endurance. Her cold, clinical discussion of the family's crimes horrified even experienced law enforcement officers who had dealt with the worst kinds of human depravity. The children's involvement proved to be the most disturbing aspect of the entire case. Edmund, Violet, and Charles had been raised from early childhood to view animal torture as normal family activity. Their interrogations revealed that they had been systematically trained in various methods of inflicting suffering and had competed with each other to develop new techniques for maximizing pain while prolonging life. The psychological damage inflicted on these young people was so severe that several court-appointed psychiatrists declared them beyond rehabilitation. Judge Harrison Thorne, who presided over the preliminary hearings, found himself dealing with a case unlike anything in his 30 years on the bench. The sheer volume of evidence was staggering. Thousands of photographs, detailed journals spanning decades, financial records documenting hundreds of transactions, and testimony from witnesses who had finally found the courage to speak out. The legal proceedings were complicated by the involvement of numerous prominent citizens who had participated in the family's activities as paying customers. The customer registry discovered at the Norris estate led to a series of additional arrests that sent shockwaves throughout New England's social elite. Among those charged were a Massachusetts state senator, 2 prominent Boston physicians, a Harvard professor, and several wealthy businessmen whose names were synonymous with respectability and civic virtue. The revelation that such distinguished individuals had been paying to participate in animal torture sessions created a scandal that reached far beyond Millbrook's borders. The legal strategy employed by the defense attorneys reflected the difficulty. of addressing crimes that were so far outside normal human experience. They attempted to argue that the family suffered from a form of shared mental illness that prevented them from understanding the moral implications of their actions. This approach failed completely when the prosecution demonstrated the careful planning, sophisticated business operations, and elaborate security measures that had kept the torture enterprise hidden for decades. The trial itself became a media sensation, drawing reporters from newspapers throughout the Northeast and creating what many observers considered the first truly national criminal case of the new century. The testimony was so disturbing that Judge Thorne was forced to clear the courtroom of spectators on multiple occasions, and several jurors required medical attention after viewing the photographic evidence. The proceedings were marked by an atmosphere of horror and disbelief that such systematic evil could have flourished undetected for so long. Public reaction to the revelations was swift and decisive. Theodore Norris's textile mill was immediately boycotted, forcing its closure. Within weeks of his arrest, the family's mansion was vandalized repeatedly until local authorities were forced to post guards around the property. Several of the prominent citizens implicated in the customer registry faced similar public condemnation. Businesses failed, political careers ended abruptly, and social standing evaporated overnight. The broader implications of the case extended far beyond the immediate participants. The revelation that so many supposedly respectable citizens had been involved in or complicit with the family's crimes forced a reckoning with the foundations of social authority and moral leadership. Churches, civic organizations, and professional associations found themselves questioned about their ability to identify and prevent such corruption within their ranks. Dr. Pemberton, whose courage in speaking out had made the investigation possible, found his position in the community forever changed. While some praised him as a hero who had exposed a monstrous evil, others blamed him for destroying the town's reputation and economic stability. His medical practice survived, but he never again enjoyed the universal respect and trust he had previously commanded. The personal cost of his decision to pursue the truth served as a sobering reminder of why so many others had chosen silence over justice. The legal proceedings concluded with sentences that reflected the unprecedented nature of the crimes. Theodore and Constance Norris were both sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge noting that the systematic and commercial nature of their crimes warranted the harshest possible punishment short of execution. The three children, despite their young ages, received lengthy prison terms that would keep them incarcerated well into adulthood, if not for the remainder of their lives. The customer registry cases resulted in additional convictions that sent dozens of prominent citizens to prison and destroyed the reputations of many more who were identified but not formally charged. The scandal effectively dismantled an entire network of corruption that had extended throughout New England's social and political elite, demonstrating how easily wealth and respectability could mask the most depraved forms of human behavior. In the aftermath of the trials, the Norris estate was sold at public auction, with the proceeds designated for charitable organizations dedicated to animal welfare. The house itself was eventually demolished, as no buyer could be found willing to occupy a property so thoroughly associated with systematic cruelty. The empty lot remained undeveloped for decades, serving as a stark reminder of the horrors that had once taken place there. The broader impact on Millbrook was devastating and permanent. The town's reputation never recovered from its association with the Norris crimes, and the economic devastation caused by the mill's closure forced many families to relocate elsewhere in search of employment. Those who remained found themselves living in a community forever marked by its failure to protect innocent creatures from unimaginable suffering and its willingness to overlook evil in exchange for economic prosperity. The story of the Norris family serves as a chilling reminder that respectability and evil can coexist behind the most carefully maintained facades. For 30 years, Theodore and Constance Norris operated a commercial torture enterprise that catered to the darkest impulses of New England's social elite, all while maintaining their position as Millbrook's most respected citizens. Their crimes were enabled not just by their own moral bankruptcy, but by a community's willingness to look the other way when confronted with uncomfortable truths. The 47 dogs that disappeared from the Norris estate were more than just animals. They were innocent victims of a systematic campaign of cruelty that revealed the capacity for evil that can lurk within seemingly civilized society. Their suffering was prolonged and intensified by the silence of neighbors who suspected something was wrong but lacked the courage to speak out, and by officials who chose personal comfort over moral obligation. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the realization that the Norris family's crimes were not the product of sudden madness or impulsive cruelty, but of careful planning, systematic methodology, and calculated business operations that treated torture as a legitimate enterprise. The detailed records they maintained, the sophisticated equipment they developed, and the extensive network of customers they cultivated demonstrate that evil can be as organized and methodical as any other human endeavor. The empty lot where the Norris mansion once stood serves as a permanent memorial to the victims of their crimes, and a reminder that some houses don't remember joy. They echo with the suffering of the innocent and the silence of those who could have acted, but chose not to. The legacy of the Norris family is not just one of individual depravity, but of collective failure to protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable for their actions. As we reflect on this dark chapter in American history, we must ask ourselves what lessons we can learn from Millbrook's tragedy. How many other respectable facades conceal similar horrors? How often do we choose comfortable ignorance over difficult truth? And most importantly, what responsibility do we bear when we suspect that evil is being committed in our midst, but lack the courage to confront it? The Norris family's crimes were enabled by a society that valued reputation over reality, prosperity over justice, and social harmony over moral courage. Their story reminds us that the price of looking away when confronted with evil is measured not just in the suffering of direct victims, but in the corruption of everyone who chooses silence over truth. If you found this exploration of one of America's most disturbing family secrets as compelling as it was horrifying, make sure to subscribe to the Creepy Journal and ring that notification bell. We delve deep into the dark corners of history that others prefer to forget, bringing you the stories that reveal the capacity for both evil and courage that exists within the human heart. Join us next time as we uncover another tale from the shadows of the past, where truth is indeed stranger and more terrifying than fiction.